to next. So you've mentioned about teaching staff and non-teaching staff. What are the different protocols that apply to these two categories of employees in any school?
Well, for the teaching staff, you realize that they are interacting a lot with the learners. So there is the issue of making sure that they have observed a lot of cleanliness in terms of washing their hands, wearing their masks all through, the class arrangement in terms of even how the desks should face, the gap between a learner and the other. And when they are also doing their instructions, there shouldn't be that physical contact. When it comes to the non-teaching staff, for example, the cleaners, they should always wear their regalia in terms of their gumboots, their aprons, their masks, and their gloves, and of course, keep washing their hands. Utensils shouldn't be shared, and those are some of the guidelines that we are following.
For the parents, because some have got to take the children to, they've got to take their children to school, pick them from school. What are the guidelines involved? And also some, in the case of boarding schools, how much access are parents given to the facilities in a school?
The ministry was very clear on what should happen when it comes to parents. In terms of access to the school, there should be very minimal, if any, activities in the school involving parents. For example, games, meetings, parent meetings. For right now, they are banned, and that's what also the directive says. If it comes to picking, then definitely the schools that have probably waiting areas for the learners, they should be able to observe the same guidelines. If it is waiting area, wear their masks anytime that they are picking their children. If it is on the vehicles, then they must also make sure that there is the distance. If it is actually the caretakers in the vehicles, for example, school transport, then they must ensure that they are taking care of the learners as they should. The other thing is, you asked about boarding schools. There was the issue of spacing of the beds. They shouldn't have like very close proximity to each other, the way they should also lie when they are sleeping. And those are measures that we have, for example, in the private schools, been really, really keen to implement.
In the case of public schools, I mean, I've attended a public school, and I remember cubicle had 2 beds, double-decker beds,
yes.
And with the increased population, especially after the introduction of the free primary education, and looking that everyone's now going back to school, what are the challenges when it comes to implementing, some of these measures and the, in terms of hygiene and interaction when it comes to the dormitories, which may, if a cubicle had 4 occupants, then right now it could have 6.
Daniel, when COVID was first indicated, there was a lot of fear and a lot of worry and a lot of, uncertainty about it. But as the months have also as we have moved on, it's been very clear that actually, probably it may not be very realistic to implement the way initially it was intended to. Yesterday, Professor Mbugua, the CS, was very clear that social distancing may not be very achievable given the population that we have in our public schools. So what the public schools ideally then should do is that they should ensure that at least they can do what is the bare minimum. In this case, I mean washing of hands, ensuring that they wear their masks, and they keep the distance that they can. Yeah.
Of which, now talking about numbers and the huge, and why Professor Mbugua was mentioning this,
yes.
Imagine this number, 16 million people are going back to school.
Yes.
So that's the impact that we've got. And for education administrators and communication with parents now, and when it comes to first the public schools, I'm trying to think of a student who is from Maseno, but attends a public school, national school, say in Mombasa County, say like Shimolatewa, and vice versa. How much of coordination is being done between people in transport, the security, and also the national government administrative officers plus also the schools, to ensure that this movement across the country is smooth and does not affect the day on which children report to school?
One of our core values, Daniel, in the new curriculum is collaboration. What I believe right now is required is that all the collaborators, rather all the departments collaborate. In this case, I'm looking at the Ministry of Health. I'm looking at the Ministry of Transport as they are transporting the learners across the country. I'm looking at the Ministry of Interior. There's a lot of safety that needs to be looked at. And of course the Ministry of Education, and many more players that come in place. Definitely there is a bit of exposure when these children are transversing, as you have indicated. However, I believe that these children have also been transversing, some to their grandparents' place, and they have traveled and come back. In the event that completely a parent feels that maybe their child is vulnerable, then they could approach maybe a local school, a day school, where this child can attend school quite well.
And it also brings in another issue. For example, this morning we saw some of the pictures and the report where students at Kibra, at the Olympic Primary School in Kibra here in Nairobi County, Professor Mbugua was there, and there are parents who want their children to go there, and the biggest effect has been the closure of private schools. So what's this transition that's there, and also the capacity available for the different classes?
Right now at the public schools, we are at about 150% over in terms of population. I don't believe that this is the time to again, if you're coming from a private school, to again take your child to the public school. They are already stretched. Already their capacity is stretched. I believe in the same locality, there are quite a number of other private schools that can fit one's budget, that can fit their ability, in the event that maybe where they were, the school was closed, that they can still approach. Because I think we've got to also get out of this mentality that, we want the government to provide education. They can only do so much. Rome was not built in one day. These schools, COVID just struck. We are expecting that they should have built additional classrooms. They should have had more infrastructure. It is probably not possible. But I'm sure there are still also other upcoming schools, private schools, that can fit their budget, that they can attend. And
in that case, one of the things that somebody's got to ask, for this somebody's young, somebody's probably in standard 6.
Yes.
What's the psychological effect of this change of environment from a private school to a public school?
Actually, probably that is the other thing that we have to take care of. These children have been used to a certain way of living, a certain way of working. As parents, we need to look at all that in a holistic way. Let's not just look at probably that the financial issues have been strained and all. And that's why I said it does not have to be, that drastic change. I'm sure there could still be another learning institution that this child can fit in and not probably pushed into public where already they are so stretched. We have to take care of the psychosocial aspect of these children, even when they come back, even when we receive them back to school, both for the private and for the public. These are children that have been home for the longest,
10 months,
probably in their lives, in their learning lives. So we are receiving them back. We don't know what they've been going through, what situations they have been through, and that is something else that we as the educators have to ensure that we are incorporating in the curriculum as we move on.
Something else that has come up is the case of national examination candidates, and there are schools that have been closed, and so the government has issued that they will be enrolled in various schools from where they will sit their examinations as guided by the Ministry of Education, and this is through the National Examinations Council. Just explain that aspect, especially for those in Standard 8 and for those in Form 4, because this is the term when they are going to get examined.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. One thing I would probably start by saying and congratulating the government is the 100% transition, because that has ensured that no learner is left out. The other thing is that the system is very well structured in such a way that all learners and all candidate class, all the candidates are registered with the Kenya National Examination Council. Therefore, their database is already there, and we know which candidates, rather it's known which candidate where they will sit. It has happened in the past. Schools close for different reasons, and or transitions happen. Probably a parent transfers to another school, but the center remains. By this case, I don't mean necessarily the physical center. I mean the examination center. So
basically the name of the school.
The name of the school. So the government facilitates that, and they are able to transition those learners. We had a case last year, but one, where we had a school that collapsed, and those learners were able to be transitioned to another place where they could sit there.
Oh, you're talking about the school at Ngando?
Yes.
Yes.
And they were able to sit the exam. But their registration will come out with the center. So in terms of where they'll sit the exam, that's not probably a big deal. It's identifying early, which I believe the government has been actually asking us in schools to confirm, like the candidates who we have in school and where they are going to sit the exams, who have left. Yeah, so that the placements can happen.
So in short, the index number that you have from the school you had, you retain that.
You retain that
through until you now move on to to high school.
And the results will come out with your registration center.
And it's also now brings up another issue. Sometime back, for example, if it's KCPE examinations, you would have the rest of the school away, and they do their examinations.
Yes.
For high schools, it's considered that they have grown and are able to understand the sensitivity of examinations. How's this? What's the plan now for the candidates who will be doing the examinations in about 3 months?
I probably would start by thanking the government that we've not lost an year. By that I mean the system is in place to make sure within about 3 years we've recovered from the loss, so that 2020 is not counted as a lost year. So what will happen is that actually it's just that they are sitting the exam in March for the Class 8 candidates, and therefore when the others close, then they will be left for their 1 week, 4 days, or actually the 3 exam days, and then they'll go home. For the Form 4s, I believe it's the same thing. The other Form 1 to 3 will close at some point and be able to pave way for the candidates to be left and do their exam. There will be time for marking, and that's why we are also breaking for about 7 weeks. Yeah.
And when it comes to this transition, what is the first thing that parents should know and also expect from their children 10 months out, with the exception of grade 4, standard 8 and Form 4? For the others, what kind of pressures are going to be on a child? One, to make sure that they do catch up with the syllabus as should be, because basically it's the equivalent of 2.5 schooling terms that were lost. Yeah. What's the plan in place?
If you look at the normal calendar year, Daniel, is that normally what we have is so many breaks. We normally would have 1 week of midterm, then we would close for 3 weeks. Then again, say in December, we would have a whole 2 months. So what has happened is that this has been condensed so that for a near 14-week term has been condensed, and now it's 11 weeks. So we're probably looking at 3 weeks. But along the way, the calendar has been worked in such a way that time will be recovered over time. Definitely what we need to do, the whole team of us, is that includes the educators themselves, the parents, the government, and the learners themselves, is first and foremost to understand that they have been out of school for this long. Most of the learnings might have been lost in the process. So what we need to do is take them slowly and start, like some things we might have to start reintroducing to them, and then along the way we need to catch up. I'll give an instance of what we did with our grade 4s and our Class 8s. First and foremost, as I said, the psychosocial is very important. It's to sit them down, make them understand that we have a very short term, this is what there is, and this is what needs to be covered. The teacher can only do so much, and the learner is also expected to do so much. The parents, on on the other hand, also need to come in. For example, the CBC requires a lot of parent involvement. Are they willing to also be involved so that if we give work home, for example, some schools may not be able to hold everybody. So they are actually creating a program whereby maybe some learners are in school in the morning, others in the afternoon. What does that mean? This learner carries work home. And who will assist them when they are doing this work? So it has to be a lot of collaboration from all of us.
So you've said some of the things that you had to really introduce through for those who reported back, and let me just approach them from the different age groups that they have.
Yes.
Grade 4, you're talking about probably 9-10-year-olds. Yeah. Standard 8, you're talking about 12-13-14. 14, yes. And for those in Form 4, you're talking about 17-18. Yeah. What were the introductory stages for these learners?
In terms of when they first came to school, because, you know, it was announced that this is when they are going to come back to school, as I said, when I began, I said there are guidelines that are there for the learners, for the teachers, for the non-teachers, and it is taking them through each and every guideline and what is the expectation from them, both the health guidelines and the education guidelines. So it is to let them know that this is the match we have to cover. The younger ones may probably not really understand. If you talk of curriculum, they may not really understand.
No, play is more important at that age.
Yes, but it is to understand that if you go out to play, this is what we expect. Because the truth is, we may not completely tie them off from playing. Remember, they are social beings, and there is a lot of play that comes into place. So it's for them to understand, even if we are going to interact, this is the interaction. I shouldn't get to my neighbor to this level. We've taught them sharing, for example. That's a value that we teach them. Now we are coming in and telling them, look, you're not meant to share your personal items. But then we have to be very clear why we are saying this. Not because we want them to be selfish, but it is because of the exposure that holds. So those are some of the things that we were taking them through. When you go out, or anytime you are out, you keep washing your hands. And if you remember, when we just opened in January 2020, actually we had been already introducing all this, and the children had really caught it up. There were poems, there were dramatizations, I remember actually we had an activity in school, and the poems about coronavirus, then the children were with it, wash your hands, you know, and all that. So the beauty with children is that they learn very fast, so they will be able to still catch up back.
That's part of the psychosocial support that you're giving to the children. Then that for the adults, which is also important, because they're leaving home and going to meet with people from different backgrounds. And, you know, some of that worry. We'll be coming to that. We're speaking with Lois Mbugua, who is an education administrator, and it's all about back to school. We'll be taking a little break from this conversation and get back to it and, you know, talk about the psychosocial support and also the Ministry of Education school re-entry policy for pregnant and teenage mothers. But before that, let us join our reporter, Frederick Mwoki, who is at the Moi International Sports Center, Kasarani, where the Kenya National Paralympic Committee is holding trials for athletes who will be representing the country at the Paralympic Games that will take place in Tokyo later this year.
Oh yes, Daniel Wahome.
And welcome back to Newscheck on this Monday morning. It's the 4th day of January 2021, a day when schools are reopening, and we're talking about primary schools, secondary schools and tertiary institutions. We had class 4, standard 8 and also Form 4 students go back to school last year, but now it's back to full business. My name is Daniel Wahome. Our sign language interpreter is Lensa Ondingo. We'll be getting into continuing with our conversation with Lois Mbugua, who is an education administrator. But before that, the Cabinet Secretary for Education, Professor George Magoha, was at the Olympic Primary School in Kibra in Nairobi County, and he was looking as part of his tours where he was inspecting the schools and also looking at the resumption of learning protocols. Here is the report. Kamche Medza is our reporter who was at the Olympic Primary School.
Endelea na kazi yako. Ninakagua watoto yangu tukufu kama wamevaa mask.
Special attention. The second point is that it is within the slums. So we are going to give it a little bit more support in terms of ensuring that the children are being taught. But I think you went into the classroom. Apart from overcrowding, everything else is normal. Every child is properly masked. Most of those masks they are wearing were provided by the government of the Republic of Kenya, together with our collaborators. In terms of ensuring that we don't have a crisis here, even though we had already delivered the economic stimulus package desks, I have decided, because I think the president gave me those powers, to vary one or two things, that we shall give another 140 desks to this school. I am going to pick some of the desks which were ready, which were meant for another school, which may not be having a very tight problem like this. 70 of them will be here today, and during the course of the week, a balance of 70 will have been fabricated and brought. Then we shall fabricate and take to the other person that I was talking to. Otherwise, you have seen with your eyes that if we work together, the spirit, when you look at the spirit of the body and spirit of the teacher, the body and spirit of the children, do they require encouragement or discouragement? Let us encourage them. That's all I can say for now. We may not be perfect. There are very many children here. If water becomes a problem, we are on standby to ensure that they have water, so that they are able to wash their hands when they come out. This school will not be available, because you can see for yourself that it's 7,000, it's 4,700. So this one, even though it is popular, it's not likely that they'll take many children. There are many other schools around that we will make sure the children go to. You can see for yourself that I've ordered a variation of shifting of desks, which were supposed to go to another school this morning, to come here. And I will then go to the school where the desks were supposed to go, so that I am fair to those children also, to be sure that their pressure is not as much as the one here. Your question is not fair, because when we demolish the building of the parents, it is the parents' duty to bring the child to school. If a child is brought here and there is space, we shall take. If there is no space, my people, where is the Sub-County Director of Education? We have somebody who is here who will ensure by constitution that that child is admitted where there is a vacancy. We are trying to avoid a situation where a popular school like this one is overrun by children, so that some of them can sit down. So you don't have to worry unless you have a specific case. If you give us details, we shall go to where the rubber meets the ground. I think because what you're asking is basically a story. It is one of those stories people talk about. So if you have a child who has gone to a government school and cannot be placed in that school and another one, then tell us and we shall act. I must go now because I want to ensure that the desks are brought here, and that I also go to placate the other school. We have to do all this together, because you don't even have to reach me. You as a journalist, if you know somebody, you can direct the child to come to a school. If it is too full, you advise that child to go to the next school. Senor.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
That is the Cabinet Secretary for Education, Professor George Magoha, and this was earlier today, where he was at the Olympic Primary School in Kibra, where he was out there and he was inspecting the school and looking at how the protocols are. He's seen that many parents are looking for admissions for their children, and for some of the schools, everything for him is okay, apart from the crowding. That is expected. As we've indicated, most of the schools in the public sector are operating at over 100% capacity. More desks to be available, 140, and apart from the previous ones, and half of them may actually be delivered this week. And he's also made an indication that the school won't allow in more children. And we continue with a conversation, and this is about the return to school, and we are with Lois Mbugua, who is an education administrator. Lois, that's the second public school that you've seen, and from the Cabinet Secretary for Education, Professor Mbugua, has indicated that in as much as they would like to see people get back to school, then some schools will not be allowed to admit more students. Then how do you deal with this balance of people from, say, schools that are private schools that have closed, or parents who've opted to have their children attend school closer to where they reside?
I would say that life is a transition, and at any one point there's somebody transiting. Even in the private schools, we have those parents who are transiting, for example, from maybe high-end schools, and right now maybe they have even moved location, and therefore they are looking for schools that can meet their budget. And this is what I had said earlier, Daniel, that it is time that also parents became flexible enough to think that probably if the school where my child was learning, especially if they were in a private school that was closed, it is actually easier to transit to another private school than it is to go to a public school that is already busting. Yes, and even also the social aspect of it for the child.
Now, you also mentioned before we took the break that there are new players and also new schools in the system.
Yes.
Tell us about this, disruption that's happening to what we'd consider a very conservative education system in the country.
Yes. I also say that it is time to think outside the box, and the disruption,
or even throw away the box.
Or even throw away the box. And this is the time to actually re-innovate, rethink, rebuild, and think around areas to do with how else can children learn. We trialed online learning at Lois Academy, and initially we never thought it would ever happen. But right now we have realized that actually in the event that something like this happened, you can actually still meet the learners online. There are schools that are coming up, probably that were not there in existence. There are businesses that are coming up. So this is the time to actually think, what is the opportunities?
What type of schools are these that you're talking about, that are coming up?
We have the whole strand of them. We have the international schools that are coming up. We have a few brands that, from other countries that are coming into the country that we saw even before COVID. We have the private international local schools that are high-end. We have the private schools to take care of the middle income. We have the Christian accelerated ones. We have kindergartens, and we even have both secondary and primary. So we also have the online ones that probably somebody says that I am a teacher, I'm not able to get on with teaching. I can be meeting my learners online at this point, or probably partly physical, partly online.
Something else that also comes in with that, and you had alluded that, at the start of the year, it's the drama festival season. Normally this time round would be it. The poetry and everything. The question is, all such extracurricular activities have been put to a halt.
Yes.
How do you engage some of these people? I mean, it's at their creative point. It's what they use to release the steam that's in their bodies. How can this be adapted, even without interaction?
Probably I can say that one thing that is like an advantage or a blessing in disguise is because the new curriculum actually has in the curriculum, not co-curriculum,
this is the CBC,
not the extracurricular. In the co-curricular CBC, there is actually a lot of creativity. Creativity is one of the core values, and in it there is a lot of those activities. There is music, there is art and craft, there is new languages, say French, for example, which we offer at Lois. there's PE, physical education, and this has to be offered. It's not...
It sounds like 844 from 1987, but just a different name.
Probably not in the way of delivery, because here you are trying to identify the talents and the abilities and the skills of the learner, and you are able to harness that towards their area so that they are able to transition all the way to junior secondary and to senior secondary and even to university in their area. If I'm not good in maths, please don't push me into maths. If I'm good in music, let me follow that. Again, it's time to also innovate. There's nothing that will prevent learners from recording themselves even at home, doing some music. We had a few learners that made their own compositions in our school, and they did beautiful a cappella. Now, if they come and, you know, with technology, with technology right now, you can actually match that and make a very good choir and do a presentation.
Drama festivals on TikTok.
Yeah. Yeah. There's no harm in trying. Yeah.
Well, we'll do, talking about that, something else that we must talk about,
Sorry.
apologies, is the ministry's school re-entry policy.
Mm-hmm.
And this is for pregnant and teenage mothers. The rule is they must be allowed to resume learning and in line with this ministry's policy. In simple terms, a girl gets pregnant, she has a child, the recommendation is breastfeed for 6 months. Just looking at it, that is basically half a year lost. Mm-hmm. How do you then reintegrate them back to the learning environment?
Daniel, we laid our bed and we must now lie on it. With about millions of teenagers and underage children out there on the onset of COVID, and technology didn't help much, social media and everything, I think our value system got a bit compromised. Not a bit, actually quite compromised, so that we found we had this. However, having said that, now that we have this situation, how do we do? What do we do? The ministry is very clear. They must be integrated back. It will take the teachers, it will take the people managing the learner a lot of cooperation, so that managing a pregnancy for a woman is not easy, let alone a 13-year-old. So it will take all the people who are involved in the life of that child to take care of them, the parent or the guardian, the teachers, the management of the schools, and even the health part of it. We are required to have isolation rooms, though that is for COVID, and of course probably a health officer around who would also take care of these girls that in the event that they came back. So we have to look at measures in place to make sure that we integrate them. Again, on the other hand, in the time of their pregnancy, they can be in school up till when they have to actually go for the delivery, unless it's a case of bed rest only. And when they go, then they can still be attending school, probably halfway, you know, then half the day they are breastfeeding. What that means is that, again, it might make the grandmother of the child to be made to stay with the child. It's a complicated thing, but we have to face it. We have to face it.
You've mentioned about health facilities that are required to be set up, and this is from the Ministry of Education, and basically isolation facilities. How is this being handled at the various levels? We know some schools historically, they basically had, you know, they had a sanatorium or a clinic where there was a clinical officer or a nurse, a few beds where, you know, people, like a small ward ideally. What's required at this point?
We've got to use the resources available, Daniel. In this case, I mean, if it means converting, say, for example, a library into that isolation room and having the facilities. I remember yesterday Professor Mbugua saying we've got to utilize all the resources available. If it means there is some open space that the learners can go and learn, then that's what we have to utilize. So what has happened in most institutions, private ones, probably it's easier to come up with a room and have the equipment that is required if it's a bed. Of course, at the beginning, even before the learner comes into school, we are required to take their temperatures. So by the time maybe there is an escalation, it's been managed. It's been very well managed, because if the child is coming in right from the bus and has maybe some temperatures, then at that point we need to start involving the right people. But for boarding schools, again, I know they have the sanatoriums, and they definitely have prepared now for this room.
In conversation with the chair of the Kenya Primary School Heads Association yesterday, I had a conversation with him about this, and there's something he mentioned, that from the education sector, children are safer in schools rather than at home. Then how then does this apply, given some of the requirements that have been put out by the Ministry of Education?
Okay. I wouldn't be a spokesperson for the public schools, because I'm in a different line. But the beauty with schools, and more so actually private schools, is because we adhere to what the requirements are, and there is control. When they walk into school, for example, you will not pick that learner, if it is on transport, without a mask. So already, you're already putting in place measures that were not there before. When they are at home, they are loose. I mean, I'm sure where you live, you've seen children playing, they are free, they don't have masks, nobody is checking on how they are observing the rules. But when they come back to school, there are those measures that are there. There's the checking of temperatures, there's a washing of hands, there's the wearing of masks. At least there is a program that is being followed. So I would actually agree with that statement, that they are safer in school than right now, when majority of them are unobserved out there.
Something else that has been said is that COVID testing is going to be done. Could be random, could be pre-planned, so you know that on a particular day you've got a sample collection exercise happening at a school, and it is now part of the requirement. And let me just read from the statement released by Professor Mbugua yesterday. And learning institutions, okay, apart from holding that, they should ensure that they compile a list of all learners with underlying conditions. That's number one, to take care of the health. And then the other one is also the biodata, so that the learners, the staff, and the contacts, and this includes parents, guardians, and caregivers, then there's some form of contact tracing that can be done. How's this being put in effect?
I would say from a point of the school is that we are required to actually give daily data to the sub-county education office, especially when the learners were in session. I believe it will continue even now. How many learners you have per class, and what is
that's basically a daily attendance register.
Yes,
every day.
Yes. As for the contact tracing, I would honestly say it might not be very viable, given that, you know, there's a lot of movement. However, the beauty is these children are probably coming from one source, and we have the information of the contacts. These are the parents, these are the guardians, these are the people that live with this child, and it would then be possible to trace back where it's coming. But I wouldn't be very committed on how the contact tracing happens, because that again is an arm of government that follows after that. Once we give our report, then they will be able to take it up from there.
For children who've got underlying conditions, how do you then manage that?
This one we have to deal with the parents. It's a collaboration between parents and the children. The administration and the school. Because it's a parent who knows this is what my child is suffering from. It's upon them, under normal circumstances, they still give us data. This child probably is on medication, requires to take their medication at this date. That is a requirement, and this should ideally follow. They should also be able to be in contact with the health people who are offering the assistance to the child.
Now, something else that came up is, as the schools were reporting back, it's teachers being hired, and the numbers that we've got, 5,000 from who've been hired, and 12,000 interns. And there's also the famous clause within the teaching fraternity, TSC number.
Yes, the registration number.
The registration number with the Teacher Service Commission. What's the, with the current situation, 17,000 more people into the system, how much would it help with, breaking the teacher-to-student ratio, and also when it comes to achieving the completion of the current syllabus?
Again, as I said, I wouldn't be a spokesperson for the government, because these numbers you're talking about are in relation to government deployment. However, there's still a big gap as far as teacher to children to learners ratio as it were right now. So this would actually be quite a blessing if these people were absorbed into the government to be able to streamline. Already there is a gap, there is a huge gap. With the numbers that we are talking about, right now the class that we just saw could be well over 50 learners.
Well, Irene, from the number I saw from Irene, it's basically 105. 105
in one class.
Yes.
So definitely you would be looking at, if you had a ratio of 1 to 30, you would be requiring 3 teachers, which might not be very possible in this case. However, I want to believe that the system has a way of just cleansing itself. By this I mean, we have teachers who've retired, quite a big chunk that have retired in that 1 year. And as the fresh ones come in, they replace those. There are people who've progressed, even in the private sector. There are those who've said, I don't want to go on with teaching, and they have progressed to other things. Now, these numbers will be able to come and replace them, and hopefully we can achieve that learner-teacher ratio.
Something else that's coming up, especially for the new, that people were looking at when schools were closed last year in March, was the case of had the pandemic, ended earlier, and you'd have had a case of 2 Form 1 classes almost showing up. A double intake had been mentioned. How possible is that?
I mentioned that one thing we are very grateful to the government is that it has made effort to make sure that there is no year lost. Therefore, everyone is transitioning. It is just a matter of time. And actually, in a very short time, if you asked me, in the 90s, it took us about 2 years to bridge the gap. For example, when in campus, after Form 4, we had to wait for 2 good years. But right now, the year will actually, we are doing term 2 and term 3, and within this same calendar year, we'll be able to move on to a new academic year. So
that should be around June?
July. Yes, so there is no issue of lost year, double intake. It will actually be a smooth flow.
Another matter is now the introduction of the CBC and the class going up to grade 4. That's why they had to go back. What's the transition like now, especially in the education system, so that everybody understands that I've got the current KCPE format education and now the CBC? How does that flow and the balance, especially for parents who've got children in both curriculum?
In both curriculum. What has happened is that we are aware that the current 844 system has another 3 years. Actually, the ones in class 5, 6, 7, let me not even count the class 8s, because they have 1 more term and they will be out of the system if I were to just look at primary for now. So in 3 years, we'll have already exited the 844 system, during which time the current CBC will have also been transitioning, so that the current grade 4 are our pioneers up to grade 6. Then they will go to year 7, 8, and 9 as their junior secondary. And then they'll go another 3 years in their senior secondary. And after that, they can be able to move on to whichever line that they choose, either to college, to university, or such. So in my view, because this has been very well thought of and the system is already being put into place. This is our third year running the CBC, and there's training, the curriculum is being developed. I believe right now we are looking at grade 5. The current grade 4s should be transitioning to grade 5, and the materials are out there. We have the designs, we have the curriculum designs, we have whatever guides from KICD that we require. It will be a smooth flow. However, we are not oblivious of the fact that every new system has its own teething problems, and I believe we are up to the task, and we can do what is required to transition them.
Some members of the teaching fraternity were saying, well, this curriculum now looks a little bit strange. How much of the knowledge of the new curriculum has now been made available? And also, there has, at times been a public outcry on how it now comes into being, about how it was being implemented, and, how would I say, the perception was wrong about it. How much is being done to get this right?
I would say, actually, first and foremost, the biggest thing is a mind shift. From we, the educators, the parents, the government, I mean, every player that is in the system. Why do I say so? If you look at how the curriculum is, in my view, it's quite holistic. It is a shift from what we were used to the A's, to the ranking, to the more of just studies, and it is broader now. It's more involving, it's more incorporating. We are looking at a holistic person, a holistic citizen. We are looking at citizenship. So this person should be able to stand and actually talk about their country with confidence, with pride. Somebody who has values, who is thinking. If you bring two people here, one who is a critical thinker and one who is just looking at the grades, the critical thinker should overtake the one who is just looking at the grades. So in my view, it's about embracing it and be willing to take the baby steps, and we move to the next level, because this system, it's not like it's an isolated case of Kenya. It's a system that has been used in most, has been like benchmarked with other systems, and they are working. So why don't we embrace it, check on the areas that are not working, and work on it as we move on.
All right. This is Lois Mbugua. Thank you very much for your time this morning. Give us an insight as the learning resumes across the country. We've seen the pictures from Olympic Primary School in Kibra, also from Mwiki Primary School. And yes, the parents, the demand for mind shifts and also throwing away the box. And the one thing that, as we close, for those who have got candidates, what's required of them as your closing words?
Okay, thank you very much once again, Daniel, for having me. As a closing remark for the candidates or parents who have candidates, for me, I would actually say is that they require to walk the journey with them. Let's not look at their performance only. Remember, they have been out of school for 10 months. It's not very easy. They might already be panicking. The exam is here in about 2.5 months, and now maybe they feel they've not caught up. We need to walk the journey with them. We need to remind them that it's not about just the KCP, the KCSE. There is more to life than this. Thank you.
Lois Mbugua, she's an education administrator, sharing us, insights on getting back to school and everything that's around it, and what the impact is, what parents need to know, and also the possibilities of even having education so localized and could reduce part of that movement. We'll be getting into a very short break right now, and when we get back, let's talk sport. It's the year 2021. The Tokyo Games will be taking place in July and August. That's a plan that's there. What is it that Kenya is doing to prepare for the Games over the next 7 months, and including keeping those who qualified in top shape? We'll be in conversation with the Acting Secretary General of the National Olympic Committee of Kenya, Francis Mutuku, next.